Hi, my name is Beth and I'm the sewing pattern designer and blogger at Sew DIY. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to sew the waistband casing for the Lou Box Dress 2. Now, a couple weeks ago, I updated my Lou Box Dress 1 and Lou Box Dress 2 patterns so that they match the sizing of my Lou Box top. The sizing now goes from 0 to 32. There are 17 sizes so that you can hone in on exactly the fit that you want, and all the pattern pieces are totally matched up so that you can mix and match between the different patterns. The Lou Box Dress 2 features a waistband casing. I'm wearing it right here. Let me make sure you can see it. Pretty cute, right? I really like that it's fitted at the waist. The other versions of the pattern are not fitted at the waist, so this is a different option. A different look, and the elastic makes it still really comfortable. So the Lou Box Dress 2 also features a ballet style scoop neck, and it has elbow length or full length tapered sleeves. This version of the dress that I made has the short cuff sleeves from the Lou Box Dress 1. It's actually my first time combining the pattern pieces this way, and I really love it. This fabric is also available in my shop, so I will put links below in the show notes for the patterns and for this fabric. But let's get into today's video. We are going to be sewing the elastic waistband casing for this dress. Now, if you're not familiar with the word casing in sewing, it's pretty much the same thing as when you're thinking about a sausage. It's a tube, and we're going to put our elastic in that tube, and that covers up the elastic and just gives it somewhere to sit inside the garment. So the way that the casing is made in this dress is a little different than some other patterns. The way that it's made is just using the seam allowance from the skirt and the top. So there's no extra pattern piece. I think is a really nice clean finish. It's also really easy. It's not too fiddly. You don't have to, turn in the edge of a separate pattern piece. So it's really pretty easy. I'm going to take you step by step how to make the elastic casing. Let's get started. So I have my skirt sewn together and my bodice sewn together, and I'm going to mark the center front and center back points on each of these. So my top has a seam at the center back, so I know where that is. To find the center front, I'm folding the side seams together, and then I'm going to put a pin at the fold. You just fold the front together. The halfway point's your center front. Okay, then we will do the same for our skirt. And apologies if this is just like a jumble of pretty fabric that you can't really tell what's going on. Okay, so here I have my side seams. I'm going to hold those together and mark the center front. And then you'll do the same for the center back. So I've put my skirt inside my top with right sides together, and I'm going to match the center fronts and pin those together. Then I'm going to go and pin the side seams together. And sometimes it can be helpful to put 2 pins in and use the pin to keep those side seams flat. So in this version, I've cut a center back seam because I was trying to be thrifty and save some fabric. So I'm matching those. And then I'm going to match this other side seam. And now I'll put put some pins in the middle of these quarter points. And all of this fabric should match up exactly with no pleats or puckers needed. All the gathering is going to happen with the elastic. So if you are not sure about the sizing, and if you are thinking maybe you need to have the length of your bodice be a little bit shorter, then I recommend basting this stitch and trying on your top before you actually do the full regular stitch. So this seam is going to have a 3/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to put a piece of tape down at 3/4 inches. And this is a piece of washi tape. I have a whole blog post about marking the seam allowance on your sewing machine, and I will put a link to that. So washi tape is great because it's really low tack and easy to remove. So I'm just using my ruler here to measure 3/4 inch from the needle to this edge. I can remove this. So now I'm going to use this green line as my guide. And we're going to stitch all the way around so we can start anywhere we like. Okay, now we have that all stitched, and you want to finish this raw edge together. So either use a zigzag stitch on your conventional machine or a serger, and don't cut away any of the seam allowance. Just finish it, leave it all there, because this seam allowance is going to be our casing. So you want to finish that seam allowance and then take it over to the pressing station and press the seam allowance towards the bodice. So it's going to go up, up this way. So here we have the dress, and we've sewn this waist seam, stitching the bodice to the skirt. And this is the back. And just sorry for the confusion, but with this, I cut a center back seam in the skirt, but the pattern does not call for this, so don't be too confused. This seam is not usually in the skirt. But, so we have this seam, and we want to stitch down this seam allowance to the bodice to create a casing for our elastic. So I have this all nicely pressed, and then I'm going to add a few pins. And my plan is that when I stitch it, I'm going to leave an opening right here at the center back, and that's where I'm going to put my elastic into the casing. So just do a few pins to kind of make sure that nothing is going to get twisted while we stitch it. So I've just put one arm inside the dress so that I don't pin through all the layers. And that might be one of like the trickier parts of having like your dress all together and then needing to do a little top stitching. So what I like to do as a visual reminder for myself is I will put 2 pins where I want to start and 2 pins where I want to stop, so that I know when I get around to 2 pins, I need to stop sewing. Let's go over to the sewing machine. So now we're going to top stitch our waistband casing. So I'm going to slide my dress over here. This is the skirt side. And I'm going to stitch on the wrong side with the wrong side up, because I want to be able to get really close to the edge of my seam allowance. We are using a 1/2 inch elastic, and this is a 3/4 inch seam allowance, so we have about a 1/4 inch wiggle room. But if you stitch too close to this seam line, then you'll make your casing too small, and it could be hard to get your elastic in there. So I'm going to set my machine to a straight stitch that is 3.0 long. So I'm actually going to use this line of stitching from my serger as a guide to make sure that I stay pretty straight and I'm not too close to the edge of the seam. And I should back stitch. Okay. So you don't have to worry too much about this top stitching being really perfect, because when your waist is gathered with the elastic, you're not really going to be able to see the stitching. So I recommend using a thread that really blends in, and then it's just going to be pretty much invisible, because with all the gathers from the elastic, it'll just be like kind of bunched up and you can't see it. Let's see. Just want to be careful not to stitch through something that you don't want to stitch through. Okay, so we're getting close. Here are my 2 pins. So I'm just going to get to the stopping point, take these bad boys out. I'm going to go a couple more stitches and then back stitch and cut that thread. Okay, now it's time to put our elastic in. So here I have a piece of 1/2 inch white elastic that I have put around my natural waist and kind of determined how long I want it to be for a comfortable fit. And I've put a safety pin on the end and closed the safety pin. And then I have my opening in the casing, and I'm just going to push the safety pin through and then kind of pull the fabric back over the elastic. And just keep going all the way around. Might be easier to have one hand inside the dress to help guide it. And if you can, it's nice to kind of try to not get your elastic twisted. Sometimes when you get to a seam, you can get caught on a seam allowance. So you have to kind of pull back and then push forward again. Hi, Fox. Do you want to come be in the video? Yeah. You love being in videos. Yeah. Oh. This just takes a while. My arm got hot in there. Oh, look here. Okay. We're already to the other side. Okay, so one thing you want to be careful of is that you don't pull so hard that this free end zooms back into your casing. So I'm going to overlap these edges, and I was kind of generous when I cut it, so I'm going to overlap a bit and then safety pin it together. And then you kind of want to zhuzh this out and try to keep the safety pin close to the opening. My camera battery died while I was zhuzhing this. So you want to get your elastic in here. The cat's back. He's so helpful. You're so helpful. So you want to get your elastic in, overlap these 2 ends, and put the safety pin on, and then try on the dress. And you want to think about whether it's going to be comfortable for you or not, and then adjust how tight this is, how much you overlap the elastic if you want it a little tighter. And if you want it looser, you would cut a new piece of elastic, but hopefully you do not have to do that. So you also just want to make sure that your elastic isn't twisted anywhere. If you're worried about your elastic getting twisted later, after we close up this hole, you could go and do a little stitch in the ditch, which is where you just stitch right on top of the side seam and you stitch right over the elastic, and that will hold it in place. And I would do that on each side seam, and then it would only twist in the middle. You won't get twists like all the way through. So it'll stabilize it a little bit. Okay, so I'm back at the machine and I'm going to kind of pull my elastic out of the casing a little bit, and I'm going to replace my safety pin with a straight pin. And I've set my machine to a zigzag stitch. And I'm going to do, let's try 3-point wide and 2.4 long. And we're going to use the zigzag to hold these two ends of the elastic together. And this is just a skinny little piece of elastic, so I would just go back and forth a few times. Maybe one more time. I think 3 is probably enough, but let's just do that. Okay. Now we just need to close up this hole, and I've returned to a straight stitch, and I'm going to do 3.0 long, because when I top stitch I like to do a little bit longer of a stitch. I think it looks prettier and you don't really need it to be a very short stitch. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky because you need to get it flat, but that elastic is going to resist you. Okay, I'm gonna try to hold it together with some pins. If I can just make sure I get this side seam lined up, I will be very happy. Okay, and then I'm just going to have to stretch my elastic as I sew to keep it flat. Little back stitch. Okay, so remember, you don't want to pull the fabric as you sew, but we are going to do a little bit of pulling on the elastic to keep it flat. Okay, let's take this out. Okay, I want to make sure I'm only sewing through the seam allowance and the bodice, and not my skirt or anything else. Okay, trying to line it up with my previous stitching. Okay, and if the stitching's not perfect, no one's going to notice. And there we have a beautiful little elastic casing. I hope that this video was helpful for you. Make sure to check out the show notes for a link to the blog post, which will have any additional tips that I forgot to mention in the video, as well as links to the patterns and to the fabric that I'm using. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or any special requests for future videos, and make sure to subscribe so that you can stay up to date on all my future videos and pattern releases. Happy sewing!